We're really very thrilled to have climate conversations because it really takes us closer to our goal, which is to try to mainstream intelligent and nuanced conversations about the natural world and about the health of our planet. So thank you very much for being here. Before I introduce our incredible panel, and it really is such an incredible panel, EcoGalaxy would like to begin by acknowledging, and we begin each session with this, by acknowledging that this land on which we gather once belonged to our city's rocks, trees, insects, birds, and countless other living beings that are indigenous to this land. We acknowledge this in the spirit of solidarity and a respect for our shared existence on this planet. All right, our session now is titled Policy Perspectives on the Planet, and it is in collaboration with the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. We have an absolutely stunning panel, which will be moderated by Dr. Lavanya Suresh, and I'll just introduce her briefly before handing it over to you. Dr. Lavanya Suresh is Associate Professor at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad. After her PhD in Political Science from ISEC Bangalore, she was an Assistant Professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Hyderabad. She's been awarded the Visiting Research Scholar Fellowship at Brown University in the US, and her work focuses on the political ecology of commons in India with a broader interest in decentralization and public administration. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. So welcome everyone. It's so nice to see such a young crowd, not to say that we don't have others as well, but it's great to see so many generations here to listen to us. This panel is on policy perspectives and the planet, and we couldn't have a better set of people to talk about it. It is such a vast set of knowledge we have on this dais, and I'm honored to be able to moderate it. So I'll just briefly introduce each of our panelists. Pankaj Sekhsaria, who I've had the pleasure of working with, is a long-term member of the environmental group Kalpavriksha. You should definitely check their website out, and currently Associate Professor at the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas, CITRA in IIT Bombay. His research lies in the intersection of science, environment, society, and technology, and he writes extensively. His recent book, The Great Nicobar Betrayal of 2024, is something that I think every one of us needs to read. Dr. Swaminathan is a great luminary in her field and needs no introduction, but I still will introduce you, is a pediatrician and global expert in tuberculosis and HIV research. Served as the WHO Chief Scientist from 2019 to 2022, and as Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, from 2015 to 2017. Currently, she is the chair of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation and the principal advisor of the National Tuberculosis Elimination Program, Government of India. Her recent work, The Wheel of Research 2024, is her biography, and again, worth a real read. And her career is something that's inspiring to young people and to all women in this particular field. Dr. Sultan Ahmed Islam, presently a member of the State Planning Commission, Government of Tamil Nadu, was the head of the Department of Zoology and Biotechnology at the New College, Chennai. He has done extensive research on ecology and environment, earthworms, and organic inputs, and has been associated with several institutions, farmers, and self-help groups. Recognized as one of the top 10 people in Tamil Nadu for 2013, he has been a member and chairman of several national and international committees. So let's give them a warm welcome, a round of applause for our experts. This is a really interesting panel. When we're thinking about planet and the policy perspective, this panel sets out to ask a question of how can science, literature, storytelling, research activity, activism on the field, how does that all come together in order to enable policy and enable saving our planet or dealing with the crisis of climate change that each one of us is facing in different ways. So to begin, I would like each of our panelists to just speak for a minute or two on what y'all think this relationship between policy and the planet is. What is your take on this intersection of storytelling, science, and activism?
Well, the topic is on policy, perspectives, and planet. The one thing is, all the three have never converged when application comes in society. Policies are created beautifully, but policies are completely ineffective unless they get converted into an act. Well, the act can be implemented. So there's a lot of filtration between policy and an act. Perspectives, anybody can have it. Planet is going in a different direction. I'll just give one simple example and pass on the mic to you. For example, when policymakers tell us that farmers should shift from high water intensive crops to low water intensive crops, appears very reasonable. Every common person will say yes. But when I told them that yes, they will shift over provided the government guarantees procurement of that crop, policy does not intervene or protect that. So there's a wide gap between policy, what perspectives people have, and what's actually happening on the planet. More to come.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. And I very much liked the opening remembrance, of the land that now we're in a high, big tower building, skyscraper, but it used to be rocks and trees and shrubs at one point. So I think that's what we've all forgotten, especially those of us who live in cities and have been brought up in cities. We've forgotten the relationship with nature and how each element of nature is important to our well-being. Now, when we think about climate change, I think the images that we used to see on television and we used to imagine used to seem very far away from us. A poor polar bear on an iceberg somewhere who's floating away because he doesn't have enough snow and so on. It looked very distant, but I think it's no longer that. And today it's very clear that climate change, global warming in particular, is having kind of impact on our own health today, which we cannot ignore anymore. So whether it is the heat, which India is going to be suffering from very much, because large parts of our country are very prone to heat and therefore to drought as well, but also floods, cyclones, especially for the coastal areas and the riverine areas. And what we take for granted today, is rapidly changing. So I think our policies are not keeping up with the speed at which the climate is changing around us and the kind of hazards that we are being exposed to. We can go into a little more details later on things like air pollution and how, interventions which benefit the climate, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce fossil fuel use, will also benefit the air, the quality of the air that we breathe. But I also want to talk about women. You mentioned being a woman myself and having traveled to a lot of our rural areas and urban low-income areas because of my work on TB. I know how disproportionately women are impacted generally in society because of the various barriers, but particularly with climate change. I think that whether it is getting water or fuel, or whether it is feeding the family, or whether it is increasing domestic violence as a result of prolonged heat, and there are many repercussions, and so we also need to apply a gender lens to all our policies, especially our climate policies.
Pankaj?
Storm 3 times. Good afternoon, and thanks a lot, Lavanya. For me, what I'm really grappling with is what I see is a complete disconnect between what we talk in platforms like this and all of us, the policies that we seek to create or we create, the narratives that even science is telling us, and actually what is happening on the ground. So across the board, and I mean, I might use for a moment the lens of forests and biodiversity and wildlife. And if you look at least in this country, over the last 4 or 5 years, and you mentioned the Nicobar project that I have been looking at, but that's just one example. There seems to be these are two different universes that we're talking about, because if we look at this kind of development juggernaut, very broadly put, in terms of what it is kind of attacking, in terms of forests, in terms of ecosystems, in terms of grasslands, in terms of unique species, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, if you just mention 3 projects today, we might be talking of 20-30 million trees proposed to be cut formally. And I'm talking of the Nicobar project where I've been looking at, the Ken-Betwa link, the river interlinking project in Madhya Pradesh, what's happening, say, in Hasdeo in Chhattisgarh. If you just look at the sheer numbers proposed by the proponents and the state for what that project entails, we are talking of 10 million trees in the Nicobar alone. We're talking of 20 lakh trees in central India. So where is this talk, this concern, this science actually reflecting? What are we really doing out there? And I am simply not able to. So I feel the more these conversations we have, the more the situation on the ground is getting worse. So the more academic programs and more, we have a Center of Climate Studies now in IIT Bombay, very welcome, but I think it's a reflection. There's a correlation if there's not a causality, if I might put it that way. But it's deeply disturbing. It's very concerning, and I'm not able to wrap my head around this disconnect, whether it's through policy, whether it's through intention, and certainly what are we doing with the science that we have and we know, and we'll talk about that.
Thank you all. So kind of taking what you were saying forward, given that we have so many young people here, when we're thinking about this disconnect, a lot of this disconnect can be mitigated through storytelling. And we're sitting in the HLF, right, the Literature Fest. And all of this storytelling, few of the best ones that I've seen are on Instagram, are on these small videos or TikToks that basically tell you about what the policy is, what climate change is, what the science is. And given that all of us are sitting here, are from some science institution or the other, what do you think about science communication, Pankaj, mainly to you, in terms of storytelling? Are stories important, and can that bridge the gap?
Yeah, of course. But I also want to say that we are putting too much pressure on the young generation. I mean, we constantly the young. So don't be worried. You can. It's a lot of our responsibility also. We look at young people and we seem to get very excited, and sometimes I feel it's unfair to kind of put that pressure on them. But yes, of course, there's a whole bunch of things that can be done. Storytelling is important, and I think there's a challenge between the attraction of social media, the Instagram reels and the Facebook and the Twitter, and whether it can actually achieve and create a larger narrative. I'm actually not so sure. I have my doubts about that, because to be able to understand the complexity, the time frames, the depth of something, every form of communication has its possibilities. Yeah, so you cannot tell the story of a landscape or a history of 100 years in a 20-second Instagram post. It can do something, but we require good storytelling across formats. I recently had in my class, I had asked students to read a paper on the Anthropocene, and generally they said they read it, but 2 honest boys stood up and said, yes, we read a ChatGPT synopsis of that paper. So it's a shortcut to something, maybe they understood, but I feel that unless we engage with the depth of the story, the depth of the issue, I think it's going to be too much of skimming. And I think we were discussing in the earlier panel there, social media has its opportunities, but I think we cannot put all our eggs in that basket. It can be a contributor, but it cannot be everything. And that's a challenge, because it allows us to engage with ideas, it allows us to think, it allows us to contemplate, which the fast moving media is not going to. So I'm not saying no, but we have to find meaningful ways of doing many things.
Thank you. Soumya, you've been doing this at the local level to the global level. You've been working in TB, you've been working with children, you've been working with women, and you have been part of these huge committees whether it be within the government of India or the WHO. So you've been at the heart of this this conundrum or this black box that we see when we're saying, hey, there may be these policies, but why is it that we're still cutting thousands and millions of trees? And you've dealt with it from the point of view of science and medical science. So what's your take on this?
So I think there's always a clash between so-called development. I mean, there shouldn't be. Ideally, we should not be seeing these as two distinct things, development versus climate. It shouldn't be like that, because we know now that there are many, many solutions, many pathways we can take where we can have, solutions which are win-win for the climate as well as for development. It's just our aspirations have to be different. So I was speaking with the Chief Technology Officer of Transport for London, who's an Indian actually, Shashi Verma, and he is a big proponent for public transport, as I am, because when you go to Europe or Western country, or even nowadays many developing countries, if you have good public transport systems, you can cut down so much on the use of your own cars. I did not own a car in Geneva. I had a cycle, and I used the excellent bus and train system. It also keeps you fit. And he was making the point, Shashi Verma was saying, in London, people who live in central London are more fit, and the obesity rates are much more in the surrounding areas where people use more cars. But in London, because they have such an excellent public transport system, people are not only more fit, they ban cars, or they put such heavy taxes on cars that hardly anyone can afford to go into central London with your car. The air quality improved so much as a result, and cardiovascular deaths, heart attacks came down, strokes came down. So there were multiple benefits for the environment and as well as for our health. Paris, there's a woman mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo. During the pandemic, she decided that she would make Paris pedestrian and cycle friendly city. It was not so before. The taxi drivers were very upset. In London also, there was a lot of pushback from a lot of quarters. The mayor, everyone said he would lose the election, Sadiq Khan, but then he went on to win a third term, So sometimes a bold policy making, which may seem like, everybody's going to be against you, it turns out that they all actually are in favor of it. Paris today, I mean, all those protests from the taxi drivers have gone, and everybody is now, really enjoying the space where you can cycle and walk around. I wish some of our cities would think about their planning in a way in which they focus more on public transport, not just metro, but a lot more buses, ideally electric buses, to ease. And then you can actually bring also rules that if you take your car into certain areas of the city, you'll have to pay so much of a toll. So you've got to also make it possible for people to have alternatives. You can't just put the ban on the car without, giving people alternative. So this is one example, and I think it's a low-hanging fruit, basically, for us to make our cities more livable. The thing is that sometimes policymakers see one city doing something really good and they do imitate it. Of course, coming from a medical and a scientific background, believe in the importance of data and evidence. And data and evidence, not just on the downside or the bad effects, but also positive solutions, best practices. We need to really talk much more about those and highlight examples of cities, countries, states around the world that have done the right thing. Even in the US today, many states and cities are saying they're going to pursue their, pathways to net zero and so on, even though the federal government has a different policy now.
I think that's so important and a perfect segue to your work, because you worked with local people your entire career and you're known for your work with self-help groups and farmers. Local action matters. And you speak of the worm, you speak of waste, you speak in terms of pure local interventions. So how do you see policy as something that can enable or empower people who are actually farming, who are actually in the field?
I think in the previous session also we had some discussion on farmers. Now, basically what a farmer expects today is a guaranteed support where the farmer can produce a good crop and give it to people and earn the money for it. If you look into the dimensions of income, I started my career as a teacher in 1974. This is my 50th year of teaching. So when I became a lecturer, my salary was 700 rupees. Today, a lecturer draws 70,000 rupees when they join. Whereas a farmer who was earning only around, at that time in 74, about 500 rupees, is now earning only 1,500 rupees. So the margin difference, if you can look at it, we are not concerned about that development per se. So somewhere we will have to bring in a change where they get the benefit of growing things. Now, what happens basically is, whenever I sit in such meetings, in fact, Professor Swaminathan brought a beautiful proposal of MSP, which is yet to see the light by the Government of India. Now, whenever I look at things and sit in meetings, the immediate concern is agriculture does not give us enough GDP. They relate agriculture with GDP, which somehow I do not know how GDP has become a big mark or a yardstick where people should eat. And basically, as a scientist, the word eco, E-C-O, eco means home. Eco means home. If you study the home, it is ecology. If you evaluate the home, it is economy. The clash today is between ecology and economy. And people are ready to compromise on ecology because they want economy. The same thing happens. We are blindly saying we will shift over to renewable energy. Very good. Excellent. I love it. But the instruments used to produce renewable energy are not safe. You take the windmills, the blades are made out of epoxy resin, which cannot be recycled at the moment. Solar panels, what are we going to do after a limited time of things? Lithium batteries, what are we going to do? Are electric cars safe? Look at this policy and perspective on the planet now. Electric car, good, green, we are driving it beautifully, but locations where energy is being produced, for example, in Tamil Nadu, it's in Tuticorin, Neyveli, and Ennore, is completely filled up with fly ash. I was in the High Court committee which evaluated what's happening over there. Even the moringa tree is growing at the homes of those people. You know, like something which is called as food security, where they can draw the leaves and eat. The moringa leaves in that area have chromium, cadmium, lead, mercury, and selenium. So when you look at, nobody is against development. You see, nobody when we talk about ecology doesn't mean that we don't want development. Now, for example, beautifully, Urvi and Shreyas have been doing this work, and they read the pledge. What has happened? And even Soumya was mentioning about what has happened over here with the high-rise buildings. Yesterday when I was driving, I was surprised that high-rise buildings have come, but moreover that, all the high-rise buildings have immense glass panelings, reflecting the heat and increasing the heat of this mini area. So development is okay, but is development perfectly going on? So is it related to ecology? What is policy saying? What is perspectives of people? And what is happening to the planet? They are totally unrelated, and that's where we are moving in.
Thank you so much. So my work in political ecology kind of looks at ecology, society, environment, markets as this interweaving web that when you tug on one string, everything else is going to get affected. So when you drive here and you see no pathways, there's no way to walk in high-tech city. You just can't walk. And it's creating a heat island of different kinds. But it's even worse in, say, an ecological sensitive place like Andaman and Nicobar. You have been actively working in this area. Kalpaveksh was successful in the case in order to 25 years ago, 30 years ago, in order to protect the Andamans. Yet today, in 2024, you're writing a novel called The Nicobar Betrayal, right? So we're talking about, you all have all been part of these committees. You all have been part of different cases at the High Court and the Supreme Court. But if this is a web, and if we're saying a tug in that string reverberates throughout, how would you see it in an ecologically sensitive area like the Andamans and the Nicobar?
No, so obviously, it just seems to be a huge disaster. I mean, all these big projects, and the question like, why are we making those choices is something that I am not able to understand. So, I mean, recently I did a short piece for the Frontline. They had a 40th issue, and we called the piece India 2024 is Bhopal 1984 plus plus. And I take 3 examples, and I don't think any one of us is breathing cleaner air than we did 40 years ago. So what Bhopal did, in Bombay, air quality is so bad. It's amazing. We don't, in a coastal city. So what have we actually achieved in these 40 years? Just seems to be a loss of everything that we had. Yesterday, Dr. Asad Rahmani was here, and 1984, when Bhopal happened, and today, the bird that he studies, the population of that bird has fallen by 90%. There are 150 of these birds, individuals left. There are so many more tigers. Hardly anybody knows about the green Indian bustard. And if there's one bird that is Indian, because there is no recorded breeding site of the great Indian bustard outside of the national boundaries of India. And that bird is going to go. It's going to go because of renewable energy. The habitat of that bird is where we have our biggest solar plants and biggest windmills. Biggest wind plants because those are overlapping habitats. So this question of what is it that we are doing and how much are we going, what are we going to sacrifice for what? So the idea, and I think the narrative building in a different sense, that there is a win-win situation, that there's a green alternative, that this is renewable. I think we have to challenge those narratives. Because if we factor into the equation of green and renewable energy, the fate of the great Indian bustard, one of the most magnificent birds and one of the most threatened birds on this planet, it is no more acceptable. It's not acceptable to me. Now, are we able to make that connection? Do we have that information? We don't even know how many of those birds are actually getting electrocuted, flying into high voltage wires in that landscape. So, the arc of these 40 years seems to suggest that we are going up the wrong path. And I would I think we have to rethink our ideas of consumption. And I think it goes back in some senses to Gandhi, of how much we are consuming, how much we are wasting. And I remember many years ago, there was some activist told me something very interesting. It always stayed with me. He said, resource extraction and waste disposal happens in areas of minimum resistance. Because the power structures will extract that resource and they will dispose it off. But we don't know where our waste goes. And it is about people and communities and entities that resist because their survival is at stake. So it goes far beyond policy in that sense also.
I really like this idea where you're talking about challenging power, that power does exist and not all of us aren't on the same platform. It kind of, the biggest expert on air pollution is sitting right next to us right now. You've studied TB. TB should have been eliminated from India a long time ago. We've got the drugs, we've got everything, yet it's killing people. You've looked at urban pollution, you've looked at air pollution of different kinds, and you've seen it at both the local and the global level. So when we're thinking of power, when we are in positions of power, what tools are there that can enable us to actually address these problems?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We have to create those tools and keep using them and reminding ourselves all the time. And I think the voices of those people, whether they are the tribals living in places where the extractive industries are happening and where they lose all their livelihoods and lands, or whether it is people who suffer from diseases like tuberculosis, who are generally very poor and marginalized, and they're not only exposed to more air pollution but also to malnutrition. So in India, the biggest risk factor for TB is undernutrition. And in fact, since we don't have a very good vaccine for TB, BCT is still 100 years old, new vaccines are under development, but we don't really have a good vaccine. Actually, nutrition therapy of good food, good diet is considered as the best vaccine against TB. And in fact, a lot of people don't know that 1,000 people approximately die every day of TB in India, every day. And this has been going on for decades. And most educated people in cities think, that TB is no longer a problem. A lot of my friends and relatives think, they keep asking me, what do you work on? Because you must have got rid of TB long ago. So it's not talked about, it's not in the media. One dengue death in a capital city of a state or the center will make it to the front page. Sure. she's the one who has to do the entire cleaning, marketing, drying, selling, all of that, and also face a lot of harassment from the middlemen. They can't get transport to go to the market because the buses say, no, you're stinking, you can't come on board with your fish. These things you don't even think about, right? So there are many policies which no policy maker will even imagine that is needed, because that voice telling them that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. So sometimes it's that gap, and there are many policy makers receptive. So I think it's also our responsibility for some of us who can to bring that to the notice of the policy makers and directly link the affected communities. So we have in the audience, TB survivors who've been speaking and who will be speaking at subsequent sessions as well. I think hearing their own experience is far, far more moving, and that's coming back to stories again. In fact, Nandita Venkateshan is here. Please come to the session at 2 o'clock. She will be speaking about her own experience with drug-resistant TB and how she lost her hearing, and whether it was... anyway, we will let her tell her story. She spoke at the UN in 2018. I was there. And it was the most powerful and moving testimony, because at that time she could not hear. Now she can hear, thanks to technology. But she said there, she got a standing ovation in the UN, in the General Assembly. And she said, I cannot hear you, but I hope you can hear me, And there are thousands like me around the world who you need to be thinking about. This was in the time when we were using old TB drugs and, they were very toxic and so on. Again, the policy was moving extremely slowly. No one was in a hurry to change because they were not getting impacted. So it is survivors, it is affected people who have to have that platform and voice, and we have to enable that.
Thank you. It really brings up this idea of environmental justice or climate justice. Our country is not a homogeneous country. Neither are we all in an egalitarian society. We are divided on caste lines, we're divided on religious lines, we're divided on class lines, and we're divided on racial lines. There is a lot of racism as well here, and also in terms of regions. And when something's a hierarchy, it means someone's at the top and someone's being marginalized. And it's the marginalized who are most vulnerable to most environmental risk and environmental hazards and the health consequences of it. Even when we think of nutrition, you just said that women are the ones who don't get enough nutrition. That's why we see more TB cases in women or young girl children. And this is something that you've dealt with the idea of nutrition.
Nutrition, if you look at it, anemia in the reproductive age of women was around 35%, has risen now to 56% in India. And basically what happened is, our soils have enough nutrients which actually transfer into the grains, and we consumed food which has enough nutrients. Now today's soil is completely deprived of all the nutrients. A simple analogy, if a woman is pregnant and if the child has to grow healthy, we take care of the mother. We don't inject food for the baby. Now instead of taking care of the soil, we have shifted ourselves to modern technology, saying fortified food. So the rice that is being harvested today has lost almost 33% of iron. There is minus 33% in iron content, minus about 40 or some percentage in zinc, but increased concentrations in thousands for arsenic and other qualities which we are not supposed to eat. So instead of taking care of the soil and grow healthy food, we have started fortifying the rice. Rice is taken to a factory where it is powdered, and to this powder is added B6, B12 and iron, reformed again into the shape of rice, and 1 kg of this rice is mixed with 99 kgs of normal rice and distributed through the public distribution system, for children to gain iron. Now basically, like you're giving iron through rice, we are giving iron through salt, we are giving iron as tablets in Tamil Nadu to girl children. I don't think we are going to create concrete pillars, right? And any child absorbs iron based on the gut microflora. And the most important component, because we have a leading person from WHO over here, she would definitely vouch for it, are the initial 5 years of the child, right from conception. And we are not bothered about that age. And what's the point in giving iron at a higher grown up stage? So policies are being developed with some sort of an aim, maybe to please some industry, maybe to please some technologies, but what is required for the citizen is what is required today. Planet on one side, people living on the planet on one side. And that's the most important thrust area. Most of the crops grown today do not have the required nutrition requirements into it. So even when you buy anything, you look at the compositions. Unfortunately, tender coconut water is very good. Andaman and everywhere you have seen that. A major leading private hospital markets tender coconut in a sachet as a powder. And you're supposed to buy this packet, mix it in water, and it becomes tender coconut water. And it can be prescribed for diabetic patients. Now, this tender coconut package has added sugar into it as a preservative. Sugarcane juice comes as a sachet, as a powder, with added sugar into it. I didn't know that sugarcane juice requires sugar. Right? So all these wrong perspectives, policies, commercialization and corporatization. Corporatization has changed over completely, ma'am. We have to look into different perspectives today. As Gandhiji said, our country lives in its villages. You know, like if it rains and the rainwater falls on the soil, that water belongs to the soil. Right? If you, Lavanya, I'll just wind up. Yeah, I know the time's up. If you, Lavanya, take a pot and collect water in that pot, whom does that water belong to now? To you. But I gave you that pot. You did not have a pot. Now whom does it belong to? You are hesitating. Even you know, like in imagination virtual, you hesitate to give that water to me. So my farmer, his soil, his toil. Corporates invest money and they want all the dividends to come to them. So the whole perspective is changing in the name of corporate farming. There are good and bad sides of everything, and we have to look into all those things while forming policies, not just based on perspective, but public participation is most essential if you want to bring a change in our country in all these perspectives and policy implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We come to our concluding statements. So I work on environmental law, right? And if you read any environmental law, policy on climate change, it talks of technology as a solution, right? And all of us, 4 of us sitting here, are in different technology-oriented institutions. So as a concluding statement, what I would like you all to reflect on is if we look at policy today, they're not looking at public participation, which is the most important, which all of you all are saying is needed, but they are looking towards technology. What do you think of that?
I think very quickly, any kind of technological fix is not going to work. So I think if you think that we have these problems and we can fix them, and classical in climate change that you'll suck the carbon out through geoengineering or something, I think that's only going to cause more problems. So these are complex problems, and I think just this one silver bullet kind of thing is simply not going to work, and it's only going to take us up completely down the wrong path. That's the only thing I would say.
Yes, I mean, I think it is a complex and multifactorial problem. There's no one silver bullet. So I think the silver bullet of food fortification or, one day one machine will be invented to suck all the carbon dioxide out. That's not going to happen. So we have to change the very basics. I think our regulatory, we were talking about policy all along, but regulation and implementation of regulation also very important. And we really don't have in our country an agency that looks in a science-based way at environmental regulation, particularly when it affects our health. It gave many examples of heavy metals going up, nutrients going down. We have air pollution, we have lead toxicity, we have all sorts of chemical toxins, pesticides, etc., residues. Everything is affecting our health, but it's also impacting environment. So I've been talking about the need for an environmental health regulatory agency in India that could look very holistically. As he said, you do one fix technologically, you're creating another problem. You see, so you have to look holistically at the benefits, risks, cost effectiveness, exactly, and ultimately the ethics, the fairness, the equity, the gender. All of these elements need to be looked at, for policy making. But an agency that can bring together multidisciplinary experts, including social scientists. When we say scientists, we always, in our minds, don't think social scientists are scientists. They are. And we need them to be part of these decision-making bodies.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if I was about to fall and say, Alexa, help, Alexa will play help song from the Beatles. Yeah. Unfortunately, we are going to rely heavily on artificial intelligence. I do not know where we are going to land up with all the problems. I only wish that HI always predominates over AI, human intelligence over artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you all. That was such a rich discussion. There's so much to unpack, right, in terms of how power structure exists, how power needs to be resisted, how community engagement is at the heart of it, how policies should take into consideration what people on the ground who are affected have to say. I really like that analogy where you said they need a seat at the table. Who's at the table? And who's at the table determines what policies you're going to get. Regulation of different kinds that's participatory matters, and justice in the end or inclusiveness has to determine how we deal with this anthropogenic, I can't pronounce it, anthropogenic disasters that we are facing today. So thank you all. I think that was such a rich discussion, and each one of you all have written quite a bit about it. So I encourage the audience to please go and read what you all three of you all have written in popular. I think your op-eds that keep coming out by all three of you all have informed public discourse also to a great extent. So I encourage the audience to please go and read what is available written by these three luminaries on this dais. So a huge round of applause for them, please.
So yes, I think how can students help? I think being aware is the first thing, even amongst yourselves in your own class, in your own school. You'll have a lot of diversity, right? Try to find out and understand what other people's perspectives are. Try and listen. Don't think that everyone must think the same. Having different views, different opinions is good. And also don't be driven too much by what you see and hear on social media. I think you have to use a lot of judgment there, because sometimes depending on what type of profile they've created for you, they will keep pushing some type of information only to you. So you don't get the whole breadth of what is out there. So I think reading, discussing, talking, traveling, and going to places where maybe you haven't been. I always talk to local people wherever I go somewhere. Go to somebody's house, sit down with them, have a conversation, find out what they're going through. It could be in an urban area, it could be in a rural area. Keep your eyes and ears open, and an open mind. And then, of course, wherever you get a platform, speak. I think young people today are the ones who are forcing politicians to change. So young people must continue to speak up. And like Pankaj was saying, it's not like we have to say now it's no longer our responsibility, it's very much. But that pressure must come, has to keep coming, because future is really yours. And our generation has completely messed up. It spoiled the planet. At least we should stop worsening things now.
I think responding to your question, ma'am, and the other one, I think the South Asia and Indian subcontinent is a very unique, I think, geographically, culturally, ecologically, the kind of diversity that we have over here. So I think picking up models or experiences from elsewhere, I think can only serve the purpose to that extent. So I always feel, sometime back I was looking at a document called the Technology Vision 2035 by the Department of Science and Technology. And the question that comes to when you look at the whole thing is that, can we really have one vision for this country? Probably not, because of the diversity. What we need to think of is of not a universe, but like a lot of people have said, like a pluriverse. Many universes, many visions. And it might sound very utopian, but we'll have to think of new languages, new ways, because there's no escaping this diversity. So whether it's political, whether it's language, it's just so diverse that we can't really capture it. So, and we have, I think, both the challenge, but also the opportunity, because I don't think there's any other part of the planet that has this kind of richness, diversity, and challenges. So we can't have one set of policies. I don't think we can have one vision. What will those multiple visions be? How will we work with them? I think is a very big challenge, but that really is the challenge that we have to take up in some kind of way, I feel.
Nandita, with you, I don't believe in developed countries and non-developed countries. Every country is developed in some way or other. I think these old classifications have to vanish from this earth anymore. And one simple thing to compare ourselves with perspectives and planet. Rava, soji, with salt, you prepare a dish. It is called as upma. You put sugar and prepare, it is called as kesari. Why can't kesari be white? Would you be able to swallow if it is white? Should it always be colored? The color which is available today is not kesar, it is a chemical powder, and what you are cooking is not kesari but canceri. Can we bring that one change now? Can we bring it from home? So many changes, my child who spoke from the school, you can do a lot of work, children, because I work with children, you can do a lot of work at school because every message you are hearing here, you're going to go and talk at home. And through you, we will be reaching all the family members. And we hope that we will have a bright future in the end. But one thing is very definite. There are two types of plants, C3 plants and C4 plants. C3 plants include the rice and the wheat. They are going to suffer because of climate change. C4 has certain amounts of minor millets, which definitely will prosper. And I hope, and I am optimistic, Nandita, towards the developed world, India will be supplying food in future to the world. Thank you.
Thank you all. Just a small addition to your direct answer. Read the Biodiversity Act and the Forest Rights Act. Those are interesting acts when it comes to environmental regulation that allows for diversity. But seriously, this has been a fascinating audience. Thank you all for engaging with us throughout this 1 hour. And thank you, panelists. It has been fascinating. Thank you, both of you. Urvi, thank you for creating this panel. Thank you, HLF, for inviting us. It has been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lavanya, for leading the discussion so wonderfully. And thank you to the panel for forcing us to understand and ask these critical, difficult, important questions. And above all, thank you for doing the work you do. We have so many young people in the audience, and I'm sure they'll take something away. So thank you to all three of you as well, very sincerely. And thank you all really for helping our dream, which is to mainstream these critical conversations. So thank you to the teachers who brought your students. Thank you to all of you who found this interesting and are here today on a Saturday morning. Thank you so much, Hyderabad.